Welcome back to the Clear Admit MBA Admissions Podcast. I'm your host, Graham Richmond, and today we are going to talk about the importance of selecting the right MBA program. And this podcast episode is actually produced in conjunction with the Keenan Flagler Business School at UNC in Chapel Hill, and I am very pleased to introduce a special guest from UNC Keenan Flagler, and that guest is Danielle Richie. Danielle, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be here and talking about selecting the right MBA program.
Yeah, and Danielle is the Director of Admissions at UNC Keenan Flagler. And just to give our listeners a little bit of background, you started at Keenan Flagler back in April of 2018, so you've been through more than one cycle now, or kind of one and a half, I guess. And prior to that, you've been in this space for I saw in your bio like over 12 years, and you'd worked in admissions at Syracuse, at Bentley, and you mentioned just as we were chatting before we started recording today that you've been to over 40 countries, which you beat me actually, because we were just doing a count around the office the other day about countries visited. So you're ahead of me, and so I guess that means you have a really good kind of global perspective and have seen a lot of different things in your travels. So I'm really looking forward to kind of diving in here. I guess, one thing I wanted to ask you before we jump right in is I just was kind of curious to know, how did you get into admissions and the kind of business school universe? And yeah, what prompted that?
Graham, it's hysterical. A lot of people ask me that question because you don't go to college to become an admissions officer. A lot of people ask, what's your background? What did you major in? And to be honest, my background for undergrad was public relations. I loved the connections and cultivating relationships with people. And I truly just loved my undergrad experience that I never wanted to leave college. So I ended up taking a job in admissions. And since then, I haven't left. I continue to grow. And the MBA marketplace and our MBA students are just amazing to work with. So I've just enjoyed it, and I've just haven't left. And you said 12 years, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's been so long, but doesn't feel that long.
Yeah, and I'd say we're a little bit birds of a feather because, I worked in admissions when I left the MBA program at Wharton, and I'm not at Wharton anymore, but I'm still kind of in and around this space, kind of higher ed and MBA admissions, and just graduate management education, I think, is such a great sector. There's so many great people working in this space, but also the students are fantastic. And today, like, our goal in this session is really, we're going to try to help our listeners figure out how to pick the right school. And I think there's a lot more nuance to that than just, how many schools should you apply to and in what rounds and so on, right? So the first question, though, that I had for you is about choosing the right program, in the sense of, like, how do you make the initial school selection? And this, let's tackle some of the very basics, like how many schools do people normally apply to, or should they apply to? And like, what would be the ideal composition of a set of schools that someone's targeting? Because I think there are a lot of different opinions about that in our space. So what's your take on that?
Oh, yeah. Candidates have so many options to choose from, and it can be overwhelming. But on average, I'm noticing applicants will apply between 4 to 7 programs, and they typically take on different criteria for their selection process. So typically, students will pick like 2 stretch schools, maybe 3 competitive schools, and 1 or 2 safety schools. And there's a variety of profile factors that they each want to consider when applying to. So it's important to be strategic with each of the searches. And there's a lot of components that will go into that. I highly recommend not applying to 20 programs. It can be A, costly, but B, you're just all over the place. And I think that's going to be very overwhelming. So I would say stick to between 4 and 7. Some are calculated risk takers, if you will, and will just apply to 1. And if you are confident in that, wonderful. But I would say definitely stick to the 4 to 7 rule.
Yeah, that's really good feedback. I find we see this. So Clear Admit, as you know, we have a tool called ApplyWire where people can put in their profile and the schools they're thinking about targeting. And every once in a while we get someone who has like 20 schools listed, and I'm sort of like, are they just looking for feedback and they're going to narrow this down? I really hope so, because it's a lot of work. And I think one of the things people maybe don't think about is it's not only work for you, the candidate, but, in many cases, you're going to need to get a couple of recommendation letters per school. And so, when you go to your boss and ask them to support your candidacy, it's one thing if it's like there are 4 to 7 schools and a lot of overlap in terms of recommendation forms and such. But if you're starting to get into the like 10, 15 schools or whatever it might be, it can be a lot of work for not only you, but those you're asking to support you.
Absolutely. And the other side of it too is like when you're applying to business schools and you disclose on the application of what other schools you're applying to and you list 20, that can be a red flag for the admissions committee as well, and saying maybe this candidate isn't really focused and they're indecisive and don't know what they want. So they're just, throwing out the net and seeing what they can capture on the way in. So it's really interesting to see all different perspectives on how many you should apply to. And I can't, stress it enough. Do not apply to 20. And most importantly, don't take the GMAT 20 times either, because I also have seen that a long time ago.
Yes. Okay. Well, that's a good, kind of off topic, but very good advice. Yeah. I agree. I won't say who, but I once talked to an admissions officer who had that exact same feedback. They were kind of like, look, take the test a few times if you need to, if you really feel like you can improve each time. But after that, the exact quote, which you probably won't believe, was, well, even a blind squirrel will find a nut every once in a while. This kind of idea that if you take it 20 times, eventually you might, hit the jackpot and get an okay score. But, then what does that say about you? So, so back to school selection. So we have kind of 4 to 7 schools, a good mix of sort of, reach schools, competitive, and maybe a safety or two. That seems like good advice. But so with that in mind, then how do people actually go about picking the specific schools to which they apply? I mean, I hear all kinds of, people talk about rankings or location or, in some cases maybe cost or I don't know. There are other factors like the strength of that school in a given target field, or what are some of the other things, or how do you think people normally go about making this list of schools to consider?
Mm-hmm. This is one question that I get so often, and I actually love this question because it's really important to consider all of these factors when evaluating programs. As I mentioned earlier, there are hundreds of MBA programs, and not just programs, but different formats of how to get your MBA, whether it's online, part-time. We're solely going to talk about full-time today, but it can seem very overwhelming on where to start. So my recommendation would be to begin with rankings like U.S. News and World Reports. Now, I'm not a huge fan of rankings because some candidates do solely pick a school based on rankings, and that is not the ideal answer. It is strictly just a starting point that I recommend candidates can look at, because you have your overall general school ranking, but then you can get specifics into your career goals such as functional area or industry, because there's also rankings on that as well. So I would say use it as a starting list, and because you're going into an MBA program, start your research by putting everything into an Excel spreadsheet. Keep it organized. A lot of MBAs are type A and they like to have them, just everything in one spot that's easily accessible. And so I recommend starting there, listing out some schools. And then secondly is why you're going to pursue an MBA. Is it to change your functional area or industry? Are you looking to get an in-depth, deeper dive within your role, or do you want to expand on your leaderships? You really want to understand why you're shifting an MBA, and that's going to help you with your search of the right school. So at UNC Kenan-Flagler, there are over 54% of students in the class of 2021 who came in from a non-business background, and they're looking to pivot into potentially a new function area or industry. So we provide the breadth of business in core classes so that our students are learning the essentials of accounting, finance, and strategy, and then they can go into their concentration area to be more of that subject matter expert, if you will. We're known as a general management school, but we're highly ranked in real estate, healthcare, consulting, and energy. So we'll get a lot of students that want to focus on that. So I think it's important that students know why they want to pursue an MBA and look at those career goals, but also look at the alumni network. That's going to be a key indicator of where alums are ending up after they graduate from that program. Another factor that I highly recommend, and something that we were talking about a little bit earlier, and was actually a conversation I had last night with a friend who is looking at MBA programs, is location. You're going to be at an MBA program for 2 years, so you want to make sure that you are happy with that. Things that you want to consider are, cost of living. If you live in a large city like New York, it can be a little bit more expensive than saying maybe living in a Chapel Hill area. Also, you want to think about how immersive is the community. So if you're going to a larger school setting, people can be spread out, like your classmates, in different areas of the city, whereas a smaller area, you might be more immersed into the area with your classmates and be more accessible to campus. So those are a couple things you want to think about, but also how accessible is the location? If you are not going to a larger city, is it within driving distance? Is it with a flight away? So you want to make sure that it is accessible, and also go into your personal preferences. What kind of culture do you like? What are some of your passions that you like to do? Because you're going to a new place for 2 years. You're not going to stay there forever. Who knows? Maybe you will. But you want to think about what you like to do for fun. Is it snowboarding and skiing? Then maybe you don't want to go to school in the South. You may want to go somewhere where you can do that, in the North, or from a global perspective, because you can get MBA programs anywhere. It's not just in the U.S. So those are a couple of things that I would highly recommend to take into consideration.
Yeah, and I think back to a comment you made earlier about, when you're applying to like 20 schools, how does that look on your application when a school asks, what other programs are you considering? I think one of the things that I see happen a lot is people will stay in that 4 to 7 school range, but they'll just pick kind of the first 7 schools in the ranking and not do that extra research to figure out, well, actually, given that I want to work in healthcare, or given that I want to be a strategy consultant, it turns out that the best schools for those areas are not schools 1 through 7 in the overall ranking, but maybe schools 1, 5, 10, and 15. It doesn't. So that's something that I think people need to do the hard work to sort of dig and, like you're saying, like look into the target fields. And one of the things that maybe we'll get into later that I did want to ask you about today is that I did my MBA, but not at UNC Kenan-Flagler. But I remember when I was a candidate being sort of intrigued by the concentrations and the kind of, it felt like it was one of the few MBA programs that had concentrations that mapped very directly to jobs, right? So there's actually, if I remember right, there's like a consulting track that you can do or something of that nature, right? So I think that's kind of interesting, and that candidates, they need to do that kind of homework to figure out like, is this program going to prepare me, for the career that I'm targeting? So I presume you mentioned it, but I think you still have those types of, or do you call them tracks, or I can't remember the term that you use? Yeah.
So some schools will just have a list of concentrations. At Kenan-Flagler, we have 6 career concentrations and 5 enrichment areas. So we have 11 total. So what a career concentration is and versus an enrichment is, you're looking at functional area versus industry, essentially. So students might say they want to go into healthcare as an industry, but within a consulting focus as a functional area. And they have the opportunity to blend those worlds together here. And they can really look into what industry trends are. They can go on their internship, or maybe they want to go work for a company like Deloitte that focuses on consulting, but they have different projects within healthcare, or they can be an internal healthcare consultant within, a hospital or within some type of organization, corporate organization as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So yeah, and I do remember, I feel like I can't remember which of the rankings or news outlets it was, but I feel like there has been a lot of talk around how employers like the kind of hands-on focus, or this sort of career mapping that you guys are basically doing, that it resonates well, where they're like, wow, if we hire someone who's been down this consulting track, we know that they're ready for this job, as opposed to some of the other schools that are maybe just doing things a little more generally and don't, they're schools that don't offer majors and stuff or concentrations at all. So another thing I was kind of thinking about with respect to choosing a school is teaching methods, and even talking to people that you work with, and so digging beyond, like I think your advice that the rankings are a nice place to start to build a kind of big list, but then maybe people dig deeper based on career target or location preferences, or even like geographic hotspots from a job standpoint. But then there's also like, talking to people you work with or learning more about the teaching methods. I don't know if you have any thoughts on those kind of two areas.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So like recommendations, I mean, when you're going to look for a restaurant, we're typically going to different apps on our phone for recommendations based on other people's experiences, or we're asking friends in the community or just in your network. So recommendations go a long way. And I think it's important, anyone in your network that has an MBA and experienced it, go talk to them. People love to talk about themselves and their experiences. So being able to talk to them about theirs will give you a better opportunity and kind of not firsthand experience, but will give you a little bit more of the school itself, what you could expect if you were an MBA. But no, depending on when they graduated, some things could have changed. So if you're talking to a coworker, maybe your boss who's been removed from the MBA 20 years ago, the curriculum could have changed or something along the way, but it's just that general sense of culture and community that you'll be able to get that maybe you can't get from a website. So I highly recommend getting recommendations and talking to people that you trust. In addition to talking to, students at the school as well. I think that's going to give you candidates a bigger picture. Teaching methods, I think, is important as well. I mean, you're going to school for the academics, and so you want to think about how well you learn and what type of environment you learn in. A lot of MBA programs are case-based. You typically will learn the theoretical in a lot of your core classes, but you're applying it to practical learning, whether that's through your internship, whether it's through projects, case competitions. I mean, case competitions are the varsity sport for MBAs. So it's going to be a variety of methods. And I think also too, what's important is class size when you're looking at schools, because you could be in a program with 900 people versus maybe a class of 290. So what are you comfortable with? And you may enroll with a class of 300 people, but you may not be in a large lecture, or you may be, depending on the school. So I think it's important to see what the classroom structure is like as well.
Yeah, that's good feedback. I've always been fascinated by the fact that some of the big schools, like you're saying, there's schools with 800 or 900, folks in a class. They divide that class up into cohorts or sections or whatever they call them. And those sections are, 50, 60 students, or sometimes they're more, right? But I think what's interesting is that there are small schools that divide up as well, because they have 300-400 kids and they divide it up as well. And it ends up being the same number that you kind of travel through the core curriculum with, if those sections are still 50 or 60 students. So I think it's important for candidates to dig beyond just the number. So to know like, okay, this program has 400 students in it, but it's pretty intimate when they break that group down into the sections. Or actually, wow, this big program is breaking it down into smaller sections than the smaller program does. So that's important for them to look into. But let's have some fun now and kind of jump ahead, and let's imagine that this hypothetical candidate we've been talking about, who isn't applying to 20 programs, they've narrowed it down to let's say 5, and they did all the hard work to think about rankings, location, strengthen their target field, teaching methods, what their coworkers said, and so they've done all their research and they apply, and they're fortunate enough to get an offer across the board. So they have 5 acceptance letters. Like, what should this person do next? Like, how do they decide, where to go?
Yeah, I think the first thing they should do, honestly, Graham, is celebrate. I mean, that is an amazing accomplishment. If you've applied to all 5 and you got in, you have to celebrate those successes along the way. If not, it can get very daunting. So first and foremost, celebrate. That's so exciting. Because then the next part is going to be the most challenging, and that is deciding where to go. And that comes down to, again, looking at the variables of what goes into an MBA program, like location, cost, So when you get your admissions decision, you want to double check to see if you received a merit fellowship or a scholarship of any kind from that university. And that's going to vary between school to school. Some schools will offer merit fellowships right at time of admission. Some schools will have a rubric or matrix depending on financial need. So it's important to understand that format, but because you want to make sure that you're seeing an ROI and that you can afford business school. The next thing is, if students haven't had a chance to go visit the school, it is important that you go visit before you make that final decision, because it really comes down to fit. And when you're thinking about fit, there's a lot of things that can go into it in terms of like extracurricular engagement. What type of student groups do they have? What type of leadership opportunities that they have? Again, going back to personal recommendation, that's going to be really important. The brand is really important too. I always tell students, think back of when you went to your undergrad program. What were some of the deciding factors that made you go to that university? And also, it's a silly analogy, but I always say, think about when you buy a pair of shoes. Between you and me, Graham, like the pair of shoes I buy are going to be considered a different fit than they are maybe for you. And it's not just fit in terms of, heel height, but it's also in preference of the quality, the cost, because you're going to be walking in these shoes for a very long time and you want to make sure that you're seeing an ROI. And it's just like when you're applying to business school, you're going to be carrying this brand with you for the rest of your life and you want to be proud of that. So some of the other things to take into consideration is, school culture. Are they a sports school, as well as strong academics? We have huge school spirit here at UNC. We are Carolina blue through and through. We are the Tar Heels, and we're excited about that. And if you don't feel connected to the school, then that's a place where you may want to decline that offer. And you shouldn't just solely go based on, I got a full fellowship. You want to think about your career as well and what your post-MBA goals are, because we want to make sure that you're successful.
Yeah, and I would say, we do see a lot of folks posting to Decision Wire on the ClearAdmit site where they're kind of like, oh, I got into these 3 schools and this one, which, I don't really like very much, is kind of at the bottom of my list, is giving me a free ride. And this other one's kind of in the middle and this other one's giving me no money, and so there's this temptation, I think, on the part of candidates to just follow either ranking or money. It's sort of like, but they're not doing the math sometimes when it comes to the ability of that school to place them in the field that they want and what their earnings are going to be and how long it's going to take them to pay off, the tuition and everything. And I feel like sometimes, it's sort of like, okay, so you've got a really great scholarship, but if the school's not going to put you into the career path that you need to be on, then it's kind of, it doesn't really matter, so I think people need to, so one of the things I had mentioned to you is that I feel like ranking and dollars are really dominant in people's decision-making process. And I feel like to some extent it's because people, they love numbers and it's like a shortcut. It's allowing them to use sort of a shortcut to make a difficult life decision. But I feel like, your advice about getting to know the school culture. One of the things that's great is most schools that admit you as a candidate will have like a welcome event or a way for you to connect with, incoming students and visit the campus. And so there are all these ways to do this research. And I know, many a candidate I've spoken to that's gone to a welcome event often or several welcome events often leaves those events with a really different impression of like what school's going to be. So I think that is important as well. I don't know if there are other factors that you feel like once someone's got the offer in hand. Do you think they should have, this candidate we talked about who has 5 offers, should they have already, before they get to the offers phase, have already kind of put those schools in a rough order? Or do you think they should just wait and see where the chips fall and then kind of figure out where they want to be?
Yeah, I think that they should. As much as that I don't like rankings in terms of ranking your top, your 5 programs, absolutely. Put it into like as an Excel spreadsheet, rank out what are, this school has a stronger, extracurricular scene, so I'm going to give them a 5 out of 6. This has a great location, I'm kind of hesitant about that location. So I highly recommend ranking because that's going to make your life a little bit easier. But also talk to family, talk to friends, and get their perception, but don't rely on them to make your final decision for you. This truly has to be your decision. And I know some cultures it truly is a family decision, but go with your gut too. Don't overthink it. I always tell candidates too, it's paralysis by analysis. And sometimes you have to go with how you feel about the school.
Yeah, thinking back to my own experience when I applied to business school, so I applied to business school twice because I wasn't very successful the first time. But I still remember the first time round, I was waitlisted somewhere and I got into a safety school that I'd made the cardinal sin, which we should have probably talked about earlier, but I actually applied to a school that I didn't really want to go to.
Oh, no.
But it was my safety. It was this idea of like, oh, well, you got to have a safety. But I put it on my list and applied, but I wasn't really excited about it. And so then, of course, I got into that school and I didn't get in anywhere else. I mean, I was waitlisted, right? So, but then I went to friends and family, and particularly family, and family was like, well, what's wrong with that school? Just go. You got in. What's the big deal? Because they didn't have as kind of as keen of an understanding of like each of the, like where these schools fall in terms of their ability to place me in the field I wanted or whatever. So yeah, that's really good feedback you're giving in the sense that ask your friends, talk to your family, but don't rely solely on them because, mom and dad, as much as they know you, the candidate, they don't understand the landscape of business schools as intimately as you should, having been through the process, having done your research. So yeah, definitely encourage people to go beyond that. I guess I'm thinking, I want to give you kind of a hypothetical. So we've got this person with all these offers, but let's just narrow it down and assume that, let's say two or three of the schools that this person's been accepted to are kind of large urban schools, so maybe they've been admitted to, I don't know, Kellogg or Columbia or Booth, so schools that are pretty large in size and in urban centers. And then maybe the other acceptances they have, let's say they're, three other acceptances that are from kind of smaller programs that are in kind of more rural or suburban settings or, just not, that have like proper campuses that are, kind of what you think of when you think of a college campus. So let's say, I don't know.
Like UNC.
Yeah, like UNC or Darden or Tuck or any of these schools that fit into that category. And let's imagine that the person we're talking about like went to a liberal arts college and, had been living in New York and working and is looking for the MBA to be, kind of an immersive, like you said, an immersive experience, a break from kind of the rat race, and a return to the close-knit experience of their college days, right? So that with that information, suddenly, the decision's not so easy because, you kind of look at these different schools and it points more towards going to a smaller, more intimate setting. But my suspicion is that their peers at work and parents and everyone else might be saying, oh, wait, but rankings say this. So like, what's your take on that kind of a situation? How should that person navigate that when, they kind of have these conflicting views?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of influencers that are going to be out there between websites, between recommendations from people. But I would highly recommend is going to that location, going to that school and seeing how you feel. I'm talking a lot about feelings and it can be challenging for some people, but you want to think about where you want to spend your next 2 years. Like I said earlier, you're not going to be here essentially for the rest of your life, but do you want a unique experience for 2 years and get out of a city like New York and go back to like a smaller college to take a break from everything? I get a lot of folks from Texas who say, I love Texas. I want to stay in Texas. But they take that break for 2 years. We had a candidate last year he just graduated, class of 2019, and he is bigger than Texas personality-wise. Him and his dad drove their barbecue here to Chapel Hill because he smoked all their brisket, and he brought his community and culture here and shared it with everybody. So that was really unique. And he even said, he goes, I love Texas. I'm going back. He's like, but it was awesome to experience something else in the meantime. So that's why I say go think about yourself and do some self-reflecting because you know yourself best. And, think about, will you be successful in an urban setting? As you mentioned earlier, like a Kellogg, a Booth. Or would you be more so with a Tuck, a Darden, or a UNC? You have to think about climate as well.
Yes,
So it's not just, like if it's an urban or a suburban campus, but more of, can you handle the snow? I'm from upstate New York, and I came down south, and it's very different climate. So you want to make sure that is taken into consideration as well. So yeah, start off with rankings and financials, but you also want to think about other components as well. One of the important things too is you and I both love to travel. We've been to many different places in the world, and a lot of MBA programs offer global opportunities. And so that's something too that you want to factor into your decision on how many opportunities they have. Do you have a global perspective? Do you want to understand how business is done globally? And seeing what opportunities schools have. At UNC and Kenan-Flagler, we offer the most study exchange programs out of I would say the top 20, if not the top 30 ranked. So we offer a lot that students can participate in, but it does come at an additional cost. So those are things that students want to factor in when they are looking at their financials as well, because that's going to influence when you pick a school too. And, going back as well to earlier in the conversation, talk to current students. They're going to paint you a picture before you even get to campus of what it's like to be a student here and some of the things that they considered when they were picking a school. And talk to different students at the different universities and compare and contrast, because there's different personalities at different schools. There's going to be a different community and culture feeling as well.
Yeah, that's fair. One of the things I think is interesting is how it almost seems at times that applicants are so focused on getting in and on getting the job they want, so we see a lot of candidates saying, I want to go to business school and I want to work as a consultant or a banker, or I want to work for Amazon or whatever it is. And they're so focused on I'm going to get in and then I'm going to go get this job that I feel like they don't step back and realize that, actually this is going to be 2 years of my life, and I might meet a future partner, either business or personal. I might, I'm going to engage in all kinds of things and travel with these individuals. And so it is important to really think about the 2-year experience, or I know some of the MBA programs in the world are 1 year, but either way, you're spending a significant amount of time. And, I think no one would, I don't know, and no one would argue that, you can just sort of throw away 2 years. Like, life is short. You never know what's around the corner. And so, yeah, making the most of your 2 years is important. And that's why I think going to the welcome events is obviously good advice. I also think, this sort of geography thing, you talked about the guy from Texas. I think a lot of people, I've seen a lot of people who are they're Californians, but they're I'm going to go get my MBA on the East Coast just because I've never lived there and I want to get an experience out East and open up some doors. And then I'll probably go back, but I just want a different experience. You see that. You also see people who, they get into a school in LA that's maybe not super high ranked or something, and they have some high rank offerings from elsewhere in the US, but they want to work in media and entertainment or something. And, they have to make that decision around, well, actually, for media and entertainment, I might be better in LA. That's where the jobs are, or whatever it is. So I think, it's important that people look at the geography, and there's a lot of layers to this. I think one thing interesting about UNC and where you are is that while you have a campus and it has that kind of, not rural, but, it's almost like rural feel in the sense, a college feel. Yeah, that's a good word for it. You are, you're in this kind of hotbed of innovation and Fortune 500 companies. It's just that because it's kind of, there's Durham and Chapel Hill and Raleigh, you have, these cities. Raleigh is actually, I was there not so long ago and was pretty impressed at how vibrant it is and how it's really a big city.
Absolutely. It's changed so much in the past 10 years. The 3 fastest growing industries in what we call the research triangle, which is Raleigh, Durham, and Chapel Hill, is life sciences, clean tech, and technology. But it's also seeing a boom in startup companies, and a lot of Fortune 500 companies are coming here. So you have Burt's Bees that is just 30 minutes away. So there's a lot going on, and that's why it's important to look at what the community is like. And the other thing too I want to point out is that yes, students are going to be investing, money into their MBA, but they're also going to be investing time, money, and knowledge for over the 2 years. So it's important that they are picking a place where they can embrace all of that and get their, ROI on all three components.
So I think, obviously there's been a lot of good advice here so far in terms of, applying to 4 to 7 schools, using rankings at the outset, but then digging deeper, looking at career targets, geography, climate. I mean, we've talked about a lot of things, visiting the campus, talking to friends, all these things that can help, and just people encouraging our listeners not to lose sight of the fact that they are going to spend a couple of years' time in the program and that they need to be comfortable. But let's like sort of flip the coin here and look at the sort of doomsday, scenario. What happens if what can go wrong? If a candidate ends up in the quote, wrong program, what does it matter? Like, let's say someone ends up in a program that, just isn't really the right fit for them.
Graham, everything you just mentioned makes me exhausted. I mean, there is a lot to think about, and I feel bad for candidates if they do end up at the wrong school, but it can happen. To be realistic, you may select the wrong place, and that because, you may have listened to somebody that persuaded your decision. People can be very persuasive, but you have the opportunity to pivot. It is okay to say, this is not the right fit for me. And it's okay to walk away from it and figure out what that next step is. Maybe it's applying to another school, maybe going back and seeing, I want to end up here. Sometimes life throws you a curveball and you make, the wrong decision can come in multiple different ways, whether it's a person's personal life, maybe it's not the right fit in terms of cost, location, who knows what. You can make that change and it is okay. It's not the end of the world. Some people feel like they have to stick it out for those 2 years and be unhappy. And I highly recommend that you don't do that. Don't stay because you feel like there's no other option, because that's going to be reflected in your coursework. It's going to be reflective potentially in your recruiting for post-MBA employment. And it's not going to be a brand that you're happy with to say that you're an alum from. So you want to make sure that you don't put yourself in that situation of feeling like you're stuck, and making sure that you're keeping your network open, but also talking to somebody at the school, talking to your student engagement team, because you could be feeling like this is a wrong decision because maybe you had a bad experience, and talking to somebody about that could maybe change your experience for you. So I would say don't internalize it, but also know that it's okay if you decide that in the end that was not the right school for you.
Yeah, I mean, I would say ideally folks do their research, visit the schools, talk to people, and get a certain level of comfort. I feel like candidates inherently know, and at the end of the day, whether they're going to the school that they really were most energized by, or whether they're going to the school that everyone's told them is like the right place to go because of ranking or, whatever it might be. And so I think I would just encourage people, if it doesn't feel right, then don't, make this decision on your own. And people make decisions for all kinds of reasons. I feel like, fit is important. I know a lot of candidates who make decisions around a spouse or a partner, and that person's opportunity to move to the destination with them and work there, or, whatever it might be. So I think, there are a lot of factors that go in. And I think sometimes it's almost like taboo to discuss like, oh, well, my spouse already works in market X and that's where I'm going to go to school, even though I got into a school that might be, a higher ranking school in another city or something. So there are all kinds of factors that have to go into it. And I think your point about, if you end up in the wrong program, you're great, you might, and you're miserable. Well, then how are you going to perform at your best and get the job that you want and do everything else? So I think, avoiding this scenario where you end up in the wrong program is paramount. So I guess I would be remiss, and I know we've managed to talk a little bit about UNC and Kenan-Flagler, but I would be remiss if I didn't tap into your knowledge a little bit more on that subject area. So are there some like less obvious aspects of life at Kenan-Flagler in the MBA program that you would want our listeners to know about, and that might help them if they're trying to decide where to go? What do they need to know? I mean, you mentioned kind of great school spirit, a good location, but I'm sure there are probably some other things that I don't even know, having not attended.
Yeah, one thing I love about UNC is that it comes across as like a quintessential college town. But we have a very dynamic region. So some of the things people think like we are very geo-based, which is not the case. We have hundreds of startups, as I mentioned earlier, Fortune 500 companies, but our students don't stay in the Southeast. We have students that go to the West Coast. We have a large conglomerate of students that go to the Northeast after graduation. So we have the opportunity to go anywhere in the world, and it's not just based on where you're getting your academics. So I think that's something that's really important about UNC is that it can take you anywhere. We are very global branded and we have a global mindset. But we also have backyard benefits that students can choose, that can take with them, like the school spirit. I mean, college basketball, the Dean Dome is right next to the business school. It's a very exciting atmosphere. We have Carolina casuals on Thursdays. So as strong as we are in our academics, we are very strong with the social component as well, because people are human and you want to be involved, but you also need that time to relax. So with Carolina Casuals on every Thursday, our students are outside of the business school in the quad having food that's catered with beverages and bringing their families, spouses. A lot of people have dogs in MBA programs. I don't know what it is, but there's always like 5 puppies just running around every year, which I mean, I don't mind, and I don't think others mind either, but it's exciting. The other thing too that I love is the traditions that we have here. We talk a lot about, the sections and the cohort size. What we have here at Keenan-Flagler are legacies, and they're named after different prominent people from the MBA program, alums, or whether they're faculty members. And with those legacies, they're all named, but you have a color associated with it. There's friendly competitions throughout the year. We have a karaoke night, which I think might be one of the best nights of the year, and people really get involved and they take off that layer of a business school student and just have fun with the experience. So I'd have to say, the traditions here really keep things going as well. I mean, and we also have the water fountain on campus and the well. If you drink from it, the first day of school, you will get a 4.0 GPA by the end of the 2 years. So, there's always a long line that day. But here at Keenan-Flagler, I mean, we don't have GPAs. We actually do, high pass, and et cetera. So I think it's very unique. And I'm a northerner coming down to the south. So I can truly say it is unique, but I thoroughly enjoy it. And our students are hands down some of the best I've ever worked with.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think... I don't know if you have, can you give us just a sense of like, everyone hears about Chapel Hill being, like sort of, as you said, a kind of quintessential college town. How far is the campus literally right there? And Chapel Hill's sort of like it's sort of a small town with kind of most of the things you would need. And then people go to Raleigh or other places to get more, or how does it work?
Oh, no, like you can get a lot in Chapel Hill. So, the university is right in Chapel Hill. We're about 1 mile from Franklin Street, which is like, everything is on Franklin Street. You have your Target, you have your grocery stores, you have bars and restaurants, boutiques. I live in Durham, which is about 15 minutes away, only because I just didn't want to live right where I love our students, but I didn't want to be their neighbor. But you can, there's the Durham Bulls baseball games that students go to. Raleigh has the airport, and there's over 600 flights daily. Students may go to Raleigh for, a night out just to get away from Chapel Hill and experience, more of that city lifestyle. But there's a lot of flexibility in terms of your personality that each of the areas represent, that I think you can get a little bit of everything here. And we have a lot of, the other blue school, what we call it, is located right down the road. We have a lot of universities in the area that open up doors for networking as well.
Got it. Okay. So I think, in terms of closing thoughts on this episode, we started with the goal of trying to help people select the right MBA program. And, again, you had good advice about like how many schools to apply to, where to start, in terms of the research. And then obviously it sounds like, both of us are making a real call for our listeners to dig a little bit deeper when it comes to the offers and get to the campuses, talk to the students, talk to alums, use your network. And yeah, just really think about all the factors that go in, whether it's, career placement, community, teaching methods. I mean, there's just so much to it, and it can be overwhelming, but I think that you've given folks some really good advice and a good place to start. So I really appreciate you taking part in this. And also I appreciate you kind of sprinkling in some great information about life at UNC Kenan-Flagler. Obviously, users of or listeners of the podcast and users of our website can find out more about UNC on the site. So we encourage folks to head over to the profile page or to your website directly. But Danielle, I really appreciate you making time to join me on the podcast today. And yeah, just thanks so much for offering all of your advice.
Yeah, thank you so much, Graham. I really enjoyed it. I had a great time. I love talking about UNC. If you're interested in visiting, we do have Women's Weekend coming up in October and Preview Weekend in November. So we are more than welcome to give you that Southern hospitality, and so that you can experience that Carolina culture, if you will. But thank you so much. And, I love talking about admissions and about MBA programs, and happy to help candidates with their search.
Excellent. Well, thanks again for all of your time. And listeners, stay tuned for more episodes of the podcast coming up. And please continue to rate and review this podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen, Google Play, etc. We love hearing your reviews and seeing your ratings. So keep up the positive feedback. It really helps us to kind of keep producing this podcast. So thanks, everybody. And we will be back soon with another episode.